Welcome back, friends. Today, I want to talk to you about a film. That's right, a film. In my first video for this channel, I gave you a list of my interests, and nowhere did I mention cinema. In that same video, I teased you with the prospect of a book review for Zorba the Greek. And now, here I am to talk about film. And not just any film, foreign film, Italian film. Tell me honestly, you'd already settled into a certain complacency, hadn't you? You already had me pinned. John's one of these literary fellows. He's going to talk books. John is an aspiring booktuber. We can soon expect to see bookshelf tours and Amazon reviews from this guy. Gotcha. Niched ya. Well, let me just remind you. No nice little niche that you can try to stuff me into. Oh, yes. I'm one step ahead of all of your tramps and ambushes, all your crafty little stratagems and ploys. You'll never know what to expect from me. Yesterday was book editing, today it's film, tomorrow it might be video game review or photography or cooking. You don't know. You don't know me. You can't hold me down, niche boy. Alright, so why am I going to talk about this film? Because I saw it a couple of weeks ago and it's been haunting me ever since. I can't have done with it, and so now you're going to have to deal with it too. I'm a generous man. I share. The film in question is Il mestiere delle armi, translated into English with an appropriately literal title, The Profession of Arms. The film is directed by Ermanno Olmi, and I am embarrassed to say that I actually knew nothing about this director's work before this film, and this is the first of his films that I've seen. But I will be remedying that as soon as possible because this film was spectacular. It is a masterpiece of unsentimental but profoundly felt cinema. It walks the line perfectly between a total emotional investment in its story and a hard lack of illusion. If you'd like a literary equivalent for the feel of this film, think Giovanni Verga. And if you've never read Verga, then what are you doing with your life? Stop this video immediately, go out and purchase a copy of The House by the Medlar Tree or Mastro Don Gesualdo. Do this immediately, do it at once. No, do not finish this video. Just go. So I should warn you from the outset, my review of The Profession of Arms will include a few spoilers. Though to be fair, the film starts out actually telling you what's going to happen at the end, so it's really spoiling itself. Appalling bad form. I take it back. This film is worthless. Don't see it. No, but really, one of the things that I actually deeply appreciate about this film is that the dramatic tension is situated not in the outcomes, but in the way that these events are lived and portrayed. Alright, so what do I mean by this? Let me run down the story of this film a little bit. It's situated in the Italian Renaissance in the early part of the 1500s, shortly after the introduction of gunpowder-based artillery. In this particular historical moment, there were one of the various foreign incursions into the soil of Italy, this time on the part of the Germans. They had intentions of taking Rome, and the film follows the military vicissitudes of Giovanni de' Medici in his attempt to rout this German offensive and to preserve Rome from the ambitions of these foreigners. Just to add to the tension, the German general actually carries with him a golden noose with which he intends to personally strangle the Pope. So Renaissance Italy at this point in history was actually not a country. It was an amalgam of many different city-states that worked as kind of like miniature kingdoms within a large peninsula. And they were constantly at war with one another and bickering with one another and in territorial disputes. A kind of Byzantine politics emerged from this in which these city-states would double-cross and triple-cross one another in this just incredibly complex tapestry of political ambitions and motives. And quite in alignment with this chaos of Italian politics, the Germans are actually given firearms by none other than, you guessed it, the Italians, and in particular by Federico Gonzago, who is the Marquis of Mantua. The Germans waste no time in turning these Italian firearms against Giovanni de' Medici and his troops. And in their first skirmish, Giovanni is wounded in an ambush by the shot of a falconet to the leg, which will ultimately kill him. Now, since the film opens with an announcement of Giovanni's death, a brief summary of his valor and his deeds, and a scene from his funeral, we know precisely where we're going from the very start. We're held in no suspense over that. And yet something miraculous happens as we watch this man being wounded, being cured, falling ill of sepsis, and finally dying. We are brought so intimately into his character that we are actually infused with his same hope that he is going to be cured, even though we know he's going to die. There's this moment where Giovanni awakens after having his gangrenous leg amputated and realizes that he has survived the surgery. And in this scene, we as viewers are haunted by this awareness of the inevitability of his doom, and by his touching, almost childlike joy when he realizes that he survived the surgery and believes that he's going to recover. It's like he sees his unspent life opening anew before him. We know he's going to die, but we're there in this moment with him when he thinks that he's going to live, and we're completely brought into this state of mind. I'm getting shivers just talking about this. Olmi, you brilliant man. What is amazing about this film to me, though, is its tremendous economy of means. It achieves profound emotional effects without resorting in the least to vulgarity or crudity, and that is such a refreshing change from the majority of our cinema. Indeed, it doesn't even rely very heavily on dialogue. It can show the depth of passions with these fine, painterly touches, the subtlest expressions of the actors, the briefest glimpses of scenes or images, mere phrases here or there. It captures the delicacy of married life with fleeting domestic scenes and these heartfelt recitations of just lines from correspondence between husband and wife. It portrays the passion of love with this simple scene of a man resting on the bosom of his beloved. Or this same woman rushing in a carriage through a war-torn countryside at night, risking her life to find the man she loves. It brings you into the harrowing agony of pre-modern amputation, without showing more blood than the hint of a red line on the edge of a knife. And it immerses you in the misery, the squalor, the brutality of contemporary war, almost without resorting to violence at all. Olmi, you exquisite man. I do not believe that I have ever seen so much obtained through so little in a film. I'm at least confident that I've never seen a character so fully embodied and portrayed with such ideal minimalism as Giovanni de' Medici. A lot of this is owing to the really fine acting of Christo Giskov. I am hoping that I'm pronouncing his name right. It's not an Italian name, so I can't be sure. He really pulls this off wonderfully. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this minimalism or this economy of means. There's a scene in which Giovanni is lying bedridden after he's been struck by this cannonball, and he's lying in the bed of Federico Gonzaga, the very man who actually betrayed him. And he's looking around himself at the room. Now, the bed is a four-poster in classic Renaissance style, so it has these very elaborate wood carvings that encircle the entire frame of the bed in the upper part. And they're all painted with these just wonderful scenes. So he's looking up at this framing, and he's seeing the faces of ghouls, and he's seeing scenes of feast and hunting and love. There's a painting of a naked woman. I mean, he's a dying man, and he's looking at representations of life. In a few simple glimpses, in a few just extraordinarily compact scenes, Olmi has rendered for us the horror of our mortality, the ferocity of our will to live, the fundamental tragedy of our frail humanity. Not a word is spent in these scenes. Not a thing is said. Practically speaking, there's no action. It's just this bedridden man who's looking around himself. There are a couple of these scenes, and I doubt they total more than 5 minutes all told. But Olmi has given all of this with this incredible lucidity. I mean, these scenes are profound, but they're at the same time immediately palpable. It's just remarkable. Or there's another scene in this film, one of the most powerful in my opinion. So Giovanni and his men are in camp for the night, and I believe this is actually the night prior to the battle in which he's going to receive his fatal wound. And his condottieri, which are just mercenaries, are scavenging around for firewood. They break into a small church there, and they start to smash up the wooden pews to carry them off to burn them. When suddenly they grow completely silent. They've noticed a huge wooden crucifix hanging on the wall, and they all start to gather around it. There's this moment where you're not quite sure what's going on or what they're doing. It almost seems like they're gathering around in an act of piety. But then one of them comments in dialect that Christ died for the hungry and the needy, and they start to take down the crucifix and to carry it off, to burn it. They bury it with them into the camp, and it's this enormous crucifix that's hovering over them as they're carrying it into the light of the bonfire. And they proceed to break off the arms of the cross, with the arms of Christ still attached to them. They're laughing now, they've become boisterous, and they're trying to pry the arm of Christ off of the panel of wood. And then Giovanni sees them. He rushes over to them, and he takes the arm of Christ, breaks it off himself, and strikes one of the men across the face with it. He's in a complete rage, and this man, as he's falling, topples over a cauldron of wine that puts out a fire underneath. In all of this, Giovanni says nothing. Olmi has said everything. The symbolism of this, the entire moment of it, the dramatic tension of it, the expression on Giovanni's face, this act of violence with the arm of Christ, this wine which is shed like blood on a living flame, and hanging over all of this the knowledge that this man is going to die in just a couple of days' time. This is magnificent. This is the sort of thing that only film can do. Now, I'm a writer, and I believe that writing is the comprehensive human art. But there are some effects that film alone can produce, and this is exemplary. Why did I not know about this film before? Why does everyone not know about this film? So this is a war film, and it is an historical film. And I'd like to touch on both of these aspects. So before anything, a word about our historical films. They are in the main shamefully poor. I am continually disappointed by their appalling quality. I mean, perhaps the great magical power of cinema is its ability to carry us into different worlds, different times, and to immerse us completely in these places. The possibilities here for well-researched, rich, and deeply expressed historical drama are nigh endless. There is no limit to the ways that we could be transported into past historical moments by the power of our cinema. And what do? We make Gladiator, Alexander, and Agora. When I see films like this, I want to hurl myself into the gaping maw of Charybdis. Don't even get me started on movies like Shakespeare in Love or Troy. Monty Python contains more historical sensibility than these hack jobs. To be fair, Gladiator was at least aesthetically very striking. It was well put together. And Agora was actually comparatively decent, apart from its willful historical inaccuracies when it came to the death of Hypatia. But hey, any opportunity to slander Christians is gold in Hollywood, so... But then, thank God, there are the jewels. The films that redeem the entire genre. Films like Alla Triste, Andrei Rublev, and The Name of the Rose. Strangely, none of these by Americans. To be sure, our talents lie elsewhere. Cinema about our history and the Wild West. Films like Jeremiah Johnson, The Wild Bunch, The Age of Innocence, and The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford would be probably fairly difficult for a European to match. I think it takes a frontier sensibility, so an American or an Australian sensibility, to get to the real pith of these things. I think the fundamental problem here is that there's something needed for historical pieces, whether it be in cinema or in fiction, beyond just sound research and good costume. What's really needed here is that historical sense which our age believes itself to possess, but is in fact thoroughly lacking. The historical sense is less scientific than it is artistic. It's less methodical than it is intuitive. You have to have an intimate interior feel for the mentality, the customs, the spirit and atmosphere of a time. A good historical film or book could actually make technical mistakes on the level of mere costumes or facts, and still capture that spirit. Well, The Profession of Arms is a great historical film all round. It bears you not only into the setting and the costumes of the Italian Renaissance, but actually into its atmosphere and its spirit in a way that I do not think I've ever seen in another film, except maybe Alla Triste. The language is dead on. The mannerisms are dead on. Even the physiognomy of the actors that they've chosen, dead on. The atmosphere from the campsites to the scenes of court is flawless. And the portrayal of the delicate aristocratic sensibilities and hierarchies of this time, and this is something that I think is particularly difficult for our democratic sensibilities to get right, could not have been better. And even the details are just perfectly right. So things like this mixture of a high and somewhat archaic Italian along with certain kinds of dialect, or the fact that people in the film actually say Giovanni instead of Giovanni. All of this adds a finesse to the presentation of this time, which really gives it a depth and a reality which I think is completely lacking in most historical drama these days. Every single element, from the sober and judicious use of colors to the subdued kind of acting that characterizes this film, it all shows a very assiduous selection on the part of the director. And this holds true as well for the scenes of war. Now, I believe that war is, in a way, the natural preserve of cinema. That's not to say, of course, that there can't be great books about warfare. There obviously are. But I think that cinema lends itself in a particular way to portrayals of warfare. And I think that this might in part be because cinema is predominantly, although not exclusively, a visual art. And there's something very visceral about visual representations of war. In general, we can say that there are two fundamental, although not necessarily mutually exclusive, ways of approaching warfare from an artistic point of view. Art can show the glory of war, or it can show the horror of war. I think it's harder for our contemporary mindset to convincingly portray the glory of war, and I think that this is in part owing to the changes that we've seen in warfare over the past centuries. The nature of modern warfare, in my view, has forced glory out of the realm of martial excellence and relegated it to simple acts of courage. Now, such acts are never to be underestimated in their value, and I don't mean to belittle them by any means. But this is an important change. A hero in our time no longer has to be good at fighting. This is the kind of transformation that only modern weaponry could have brought about. I think in general we can say that the more advanced our technology becomes, the less skill in combat actually counts. A man standing behind a musket does not need to know the harrowing art of melee combat, in the same way as, say, a mounted knight or an infantryman. A man standing behind an automatic machine gun does not need to know the art of loading and aiming muskets with all the requisite sang-froid. And a man flying a fighter jet does not even necessarily need to see the people that he's killing, still less somebody who's remote controlling a drone. Modern warfare reduces the need for martial virtue in soldiers to precisely the same extent that it increases their power to destroy their fellow man. When cowards can kill heroes by pulling a trigger, then something fundamental has shifted in the field of battle. And so I think that this is part of the reason that we see a gradual movement in artistic representations over the past centuries away from representations of glory and more toward representations of the horror of war. This is a simplification. there are counterexamples. Read Ernst Junger for another perspective. But on the whole, I would maintain that this is the historical development that we see. And modern films about warfare thus tend, on the whole, to focus more on the horrible aspects of war. And in their representations, they tend often to be deliberately and even gratuitously gruesome. But against some of the well-meaning critics amongst my fellow Christians, I would actually hesitate to say that this is a failing on the part of our cinema. War itself is deliberately and gratuitously gruesome, and film is able to express this with a terrifying immediacy. This is one authentic way of artistically portraying warfare, and it has its precedence in the entire history of our art, going all the way back to Homer, one of the few artists, incidentally, who was actually able to simultaneously portray the glory and the horror of war almost in the same breath. But I think a lot depends on how this horror is actually carried off. There is, of course, such a thing as really gratuitous violence, the sort of stuff that's put out there from a mere vulgar desire to shock the public. And this is sometimes excused away under the pretext of an ugly kind of irony. Think Quentin Tarantino. And what is really striking and powerful about The Profession of Arms is that it lays bare this horror of war, almost without any visual representations of the same. It encapsulates perfectly that moment in which the old ideals of military valor and puissance were swallowed by the juggernaut of modern technological warfare. In this single cannon shot, we witness the demise of chivalry, and the closing scene of this film, which speaks to this sea change directly, is artistically flawless. The film closes with a shot of Giovanni's groom, who's standing in this abandoned military encampment in a very large military tent. He's standing next to a wooden pillar, which I believe was there to actually uphold the roof of the tent, although there are also some pieces attached to it which indicate that it might have been used for other things as well. And as a consequence of these, it bears the unmistakable form of a cross. So once again, we're immersed in a scene which is just rife with symbolic significance. And the last words of the film are given to this groom, who says, "On account of the unhappy fate of Giovanni de' Medici, the most illustrious captains and commanders of all the armies expressed their hopes that the potent firearm should never again be used against men." And thus closes the entire film. This single phrase takes our experience of this film and magnifies it to the whole of recent history. Just as we knew for the entire course of this film that the hero was going to die, so we, standing and looking back on this half millennia, know intimately that this declaration against the use of firearms would not last so much as a season in warfare. We know that these weapons were only going to grow more deadly, more murderous in their capacities, and more ubiquitous in their use. We are still cognizant of the millions upon millions of lives that were lost in just the last century to these terrors of war. And so in seeing this presentation of this evidently quite sincere declaration on the part of these nobles and generals, we are infused with that same hopeless hope which characterizes our experience of the film itself. This is a stroke of artistic genius. It is the single strongest denunciation of modern warfare that I have ever seen, and once again with the most impressively minimalist of means. Olmi, you beautiful, beautiful man! So there's so much more that I could say about this film. I am tempted to continue, but I won't. I love this film. If you haven't seen it, go out, find it, see it. It's actually available on YouTube of all places with English subtitles, although unhappily it's very poor quality. For those of you who are fortunate enough to speak Italian, there is actually the full version of the film present once again on YouTube in excellent quality. I'll put the links for both of these in the description below, although I would strongly encourage my English-speaking viewers to go out and find a good quality version of this film. It really, really warrants good viewing. Once again, the film is Il mestiere delle armi, or in English, The Profession of Arms. And if I may close this with a remark from my literary sensibilities, I actually think that the English translation of the title of this film captures something essential about the film in a way that not even the Italian managed. There's a certain ambiguity in Profession of Arms, because a profession can be at once the work that one does, but also what one professes. And I think that this calls to mind immediately the biblical verse, "He who lives by the sword dies by the sword." I have the feeling that Olmi would have appreciated this double meaning. So thank you for joining me in this unexpected excursus into cinema. Let me know in the comments below if you've seen this film and what you thought of it if you have, and also what your favorite war film is and why. If you want to make a stand for any of the historical films that I have denounced in the early part of this video, I'd look forward to that as well. One way or another, please let me know if you've enjoyed what I've done here, or if you rather think that I should be summarily executed by the shot of a falconet for so stubbornly refusing to obey niche boys' rules. This coming Friday, I'm going to be continuing with News Site Revisioning, my free self-editing course for fiction writers. And we're going to be talking in particular about how to understand your readership and how to get a grasp on the core of your fictional work. So if you're a writer, you'll want to join me for that. I also wanted to begin to tease a bit of news on an upcoming project of mine. Do you remember the good old days of the serialization of novels, where novels were released section by section on a periodic basis, say week by week? Dostoevsky? Dickens? Anyone? Well, I'm bringing it back. Some people bring back sexy. I bring back novel serialization. No further comment. Anyway, more news on this is going to be forthcoming soon. But for the nonce, I might just give you a hint about what this upcoming series is going to be about. Thanks so much for coming with me to the end. I'll see you next time for a show on cooking. Actually, probably not. I'm a terrible cook. That would be a disaster, although it might be entertaining for that precise reason. Who knows? The future is open. It might be cause for a universal declaration on the part of all of our military and political leaders to the effect that YouTube videos have to be stopped immediately for the good of humankind. But in any case, thanks and farewell.